about who you are and how we should live. Thank you for him paying the penalty for our sins, redeem us, and restore our relationship with you. Thank you for these great and wonderful blessings. We pray that you'll guide us this morning, that we will learn more about your truth and apply it in our lives. Pray these things through Jesus' name. Amen. So Acts chapter 7, and I want to just go ahead and open reading a passage from here, and then we'll start going from there. So Acts chapter 7, and we're going to begin in verse 20. Acts chapter 7, starting in verse 20. Can everyone hear me okay back there? Is it good? Good? Okay, sounds great. All right, so Acts chapter 7, verse 20 says, "At this time Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight." And of course, this is Stephen speaking, but really what we're interested in is this part that he's talking about Moses' life. So he goes on to say, "And he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house," verse 21. "And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was instructed in all wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brother would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. And on the following day, he appeared to them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, 'Men, you,'" excuse me, let's see here. "'Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong each other?' But the man who was wronging his neighbor thrust him aside, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?' At this retort, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. Now when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight, and as he drew near to look, there came a voice of the Lord, 'I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob.' And Moses trembled and did not dare look. And the Lord said to him, 'Take the sandals off from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their groaning, and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt.' This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and a judge?' This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in Egypt, and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who has said to the Israelites, 'God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers.' This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel, who spoke to him at Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, and he received living oracles to give us." So this story has been familiar because we've been talking about it really for the last couple of weeks. And as we think about this passage this morning, did Moses have a vision of what his life was supposed to be? Did Moses have a vision of who he was supposed to be in his life? I would say yes. I mean, we see that earlier on in our text. Let's see here. Verse 23, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And in verse 25, he supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. So he did. He had a vision for his life. But was he wrong in his vision for his life? Right. No, but he didn't have the timing right. So you think about Moses, he's at age 40, likely, when he left Egypt. And so we start thinking about this. Did he know then that he had the right vision for his life, but his timing was off? No. What about at age 50? About age 60? Age 70? I mean, you think about this. We're just talking about decades here. This is starting to become a pretty big chunk of time. 40 years have passed by the time we reach the burning bush. And I guess the thought is once we get to this time at the burning bush, what is Moses thinking at this point? From what we can read from Scripture, what does he think about this vision that he once had for who he was supposed to be? Yeah. Right. Yeah, like you're saying, he's suppressed it. It's not happening. In fact, I would say he kind of gave it up, like you're saying. If you look at, we don't have to turn over there, but Exodus 2, verse 21, it talks about Moses being content with where he's at. He's content as a shepherd. If you look at Exodus 3, verse 11, when God starts talking to him and tells him, this is what I want you to do, and he says, but who am I? We kind of see this in Moses, that his mindset has changed. And I would say he carried this wound from Egypt. And it has really changed and shaped who he was at that point at the burning bush. So with all of that, our key text this morning is James chapter 1. James chapter 1. We're going to kind of weave in and out of Moses' story as we continue building upon what Sam has talked about. But James chapter 1 really is our key text for this morning. If you want to turn over there. And if we start in verse 2 of James chapter 1, it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." I feel like this is a very familiar passage to us. And in fact, we would probably quote, parts of it. We'd probably quote that part that says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." And we understand that what the trial is supposed to be producing in us. And yet, sometimes I wonder if maybe I'm more like Moses at times, where I face this trial, but instead of it producing something greater in me, leading me to a higher place, I'm kind of like Moses, and I had more limiting beliefs, and I have more of this past that is affecting who I need to be in the future. I mean, have y'all felt that before? I mean, we go through these trials, and, this just didn't work out. And so here's another limiting belief that I have. Or, the past just stings so bad, and it's something that is hindering my progress in the future. Have y'all experienced that? I look at passages like this. There's a cross-reference, if you want to look at that, in 1 Peter chapter 1. It goes right along with this. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 6 and 7. And Peter says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Christ." I think about this idea of these trials. I think we've heard the illustration of kind of that refining process of the metals, where you run it through fire and it helps take off the impurities. But I guess what I'm saying this morning is sometimes I feel like the trials are just bringing more impurities and sticking it to my metal. That makes sense. And I'm just wondering, is this something that we can relate to? Sam talked about some strategies for limiting beliefs and the past, and he mentioned these ideas like upgrading your belief system. He talked about, complete your past. And I want to, again, go back to Moses for a little bit because it continues to build upon what James is saying. If you go back to Moses at the burning bush, Moses kind of had this conversation with God or the angel of God at the burning of the bush. And you remember some of the thoughts that Moses said? What were some of Moses' concerns that he brought out at the burning bush? Y'all remember? I'm not an eloquent speaker, right? It's almost like he's saying, I just don't have the talents for this task. What else did he say? Yeah, who am I? I mean, he just kind of doubts his ability to do such a thing. What else? Yeah, they won't listen to me. It's I've tried this before, and then they didn't listen then. They're not going to listen now. I think he also had something that said, if the people ask, who am I supposed to say is your name? And, you think about all these things, and Moses had these concerns, but what did God do after each of these concerns? What did God tell him? What was God doing for Moses when Moses states his concerns? Right. He's restating, I will be with you. You will succeed. He is reinforcing some knowledge to Moses. And yet, as we get to Exodus chapter 5, you remember going there? And it's almost like every one of Moses' fears came to pass. Remember, he goes to Egypt, and what does Pharaoh immediately say? Who is the Lord? And he goes on, and as he gets to the end of the chapter, the people were so bitter at their slavery. And they start, Moses' credibility at that point is crashing with the people. And he even goes on to say, "Oh Lord, why did you ever send me?" Just everything that Moses was afraid of came to pass. And my question is, why? Here's God saying, I will be with you. I'm giving you the knowledge you need to go and do this. And why did he allow this to pass? I see a couple hands. Sharice? Right. I think he's completing the past, like you're saying. He's showing God's power in his life. Let me go to Jamie. I'll come back to you, Carlton. Jamie.
Moses was only one piece of God's master plan.
Right.
I mean, God was going to punish the Egyptians. Well, if Israelites just walked right on out after the first time, there would be no 10 plagues, there would be no Passover, there would be no death of the firstborn, all these things that God was going to do because the power of God was going to be on magnificent display
right.
The entire world and remember. And none of that would have happened.
Right. So Jamie's saying that the power of God was going to be on display, really for all the nations at that point. And I love this fact about God is when we see this about God, he's doing a lot of different things at once. That's one of his characteristics, is when he's teaching a lesson, it's not typically one lesson to one person, but it's carries out to a whole range of people. Carlton. Right. Yeah, one man's stubbornness shattering him. Zach? Yes. Yeah, I think you're bringing a great point. If you didn't hear Zach, he was saying that a lot of times God allows his power to be shown by letting our fears come to pass. And I think that's a great point here. I was thinking, when I was thinking about the why, if you look at verse 3 and 4 of James chapter 1, it goes along, I think, with what y'all are saying. It says, "For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." If you think about Moses at the very beginning of when he was sent to Egypt versus who he was by the time the 10th plague rolled around. And I look at him and I think about how he's not the same person. You see his boldness. You see him being affected by God's power working in his life. He is maturing really with knowledge and experience. Of course, we call that wisdom, don't we? So, I guess what my question is next is, how do we prevent the gaining of the extra baggage of limiting beliefs and fears that our trials bring about? I mean, really, sometimes we go through these trials and it's almost like we're trying to walk down the straight and narrow path, and I've got 2 suitcases under each arm and a backpack on my back. I mean, we're kind of weighted down for this journey that we're supposed to be going, and it kind of comes to a point where we see the Hebrew writer calling us to grow, to mature, and you're like, yeah, but look at what I'm already carrying. And I guess what I'm thinking is, when we come to these trials, it's supposed to produce this. But we've already talked about with Moses, sometimes it happens. And Sam kind of dealt with, what do we do when it happens? But my question is, how do we prevent some of this extra baggage as we start to go through these trials? As we're going through the trials, how do we not add more limiting beliefs? How do we not add these wounds in our past that are hard to heal? How do we get through these trials and we are becoming more complete and perfect? Yeah.
The one thing that I think about is power that I have. And one thing that I have to realize, well, God already knows how much, and it's already so much fighting. I try to fix my own. I'm just going to make it I'm going to make total mess. And all God says.
Right. You bring out a good point that when we try and take control of the situation, and take things out of God's hands, that's kind of how we mess up. Very good. Kathy? Right. Right. Yes. Right. His weakness, and by working on his weakness, he made him a lot stronger. Therese? Right. Right, right. And you bring out a good point in the fact that, humility allows us to be shaped. It allows God to work on our weaknesses. And like David's saying, it's not about us, it's about God's power in our lives. If you continue reading down through here, it says in verse 6, in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. And I think about this statement, asking for wisdom. We go back to Moses, and he kind of had this discourse at the burning bush where he's talking through his fears. A lot of his fears, his concerns about the task that God is asking him to do. And as I think about this, I don't really feel like Moses is offering excuses, but he's addressing what really is his fears about the process that's coming up. But when does God get angry with Moses? Yeah, when he says, send someone else. He's almost at that point, I feel like he's almost saying, I don't want to do this. Send someone else. And that's when God gets angry. And I think that's interesting and important for us to see is it's not so much about asking God, how do we do these things? How do we go through? How do we grow and be who you want us to be? But it's when we say, I don't want to do it. That's when God gets angry. Look at, let's see here, 1 Samuel 16. Just another example of this. 1 Samuel 16. We're back in the days of Saul at this time, and Samuel is still alive, and Samuel's our character in this particular chapter. And in chapter 16, starting in verse 1 of 1 Samuel, it says, The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. And I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. So it's interesting again, we have someone years and years later, God saying, this is what I want you to do. And Samuel kind of responds and says, how can I do this? But I don't read anywhere in this passage where it says God got angry with Samuel for questioning him. Ask for wisdom. It certainly seems that God is not opposed to giving us the answers we need as we go through our trials. Stan.
You won't know when you're in the middle of a trial.
Right.
What have I done? That's why we need to ask God. First, because I don't understand it all. We need to be prepared to go to God and ask Him. Get us. There's no way.
Right.
If we give up, and well, we're not going down. So, I think ourselves over some of our life.
Right. Yeah, you bring out a great point of being prepared. And I think about Philippians chapter 3, talking about setting our minds. And I feel like that's what you're saying is we've got to set our minds in order to mature. And in order to mature, the trials come. And we've got to then ask for wisdom. Yes, sir. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Thereafter.
Yeah. And you're bringing out a great point with this idea of bitterness. It's going to come up again next week in Hebrews chapter 12 when we look at that text. That's a great point. Great point. If you turn over to Matthew chapter 7 for another cross-reference, Matthew chapter 7. If you think about the Sermon on the Mount when it was first spoken by Jesus, what kind of effect do you think it had for these Jews that heard it for the first time? I mean, what might they have thought when they first heard the Sermon on the Mount? Yeah, astonished. It's almost like, whoa, this is really some tough teachings at times. I mean, I find some of these verses in here just challenging to apply to my own life. I mean, I feel like he is really making some changes to the way they think. And like you said, they're just, wow. But look at verse 7 of chapter 7. Jesus, even here, gives them a tool to help them along the way as they start to try and make the changes and implement this, start to build off this foundation that Jesus is giving them. In chapter 7, verse 7, it says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you." I just think this is a very important, as we talk about growing, is a very important tool that we have been given, and the fact that we ask God for wisdom. I mean, think about it, you know. There's some big questions that we can be asking. You know, what areas do I need to grow in? How do I get started? You know, maybe it's something where I've been complacent for years. How do I get started growing and be moving more toward maturity that you're calling me to be? What are some limits that I've placed on you, Father, that I need to rethink and redefine in my life? Maybe it is, how do I complete the past that is hindering my growth, trying to mature? And maybe we can ask the question, why am I going through this trial? What are you wanting me to learn? Who are you wanting me to become as I go through this trial? I just think this asking for wisdom is just a beautiful tool for us. And it's a great strategy for us as we think about growth. There's a kind of a part B to this, though. We see it, verse 5 is kind of part A. Part B to this, though, is in verses 6 through 8. And says, "But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." So what are some things that might cause us to doubt when we ask these questions to God? What are some things that might cause us to doubt that we will get the answers we're seeking? Yes, sir. Right. I like that. Just the amount of time that takes place between asking the question and getting the results. And it's kind of hard being an American because we're kind of used to immediate results. You know, you think about the internet, it needs to be working very quickly. And we kind of take that into, I think, our prayer life as well. What else? What are some other things that might hinder us, might cause us to make some limiting beliefs when it comes to asking for wisdom? I'm sorry? Lack of belief. That's right. You know, I was thinking about one of those that kind of relates to that. And something I thought about is, well, God doesn't really work that way anymore. And we're kind of setting some limiting beliefs right there. James isn't addressing how God's going to answer. James is addressing the promise that he will answer. And I was thinking about this, maybe he's not going to speak to us directly like Moses and Samuel, but, there's providence that works in our lives. There's scripture. So we ask these questions, and scripture teaches us. We also have just people in our lives that often provide answers. Stan. Right. Yeah. Right. I think you bring up another good point of, why am I even going through this? But again, I think this is another good question to ask, is why am I going through this? What are you wanting me to learn? What else? What are some other things that might cause us to doubt that we will get the answers? Therese. Yeah, I like what you're saying. I think it kind of goes with Carlton's comment of sometimes the circumstances cause us to become bitter. And I think that starts to create limiting beliefs in our mind. They're good points. Yes, sir.
Why?
Why? Yeah. I think you're bringing out a good point, and I thought about this too. Is sometimes our trials may not necessarily be just for us, but they're for the people around us, so that we can help them as well. So, Keith, did you have a comment? Right. Yes. Right. I think you're right. Sometimes we're content with where we're at. And I think that kind of correlates to what Stan was saying. Then we're like, well, why is this happening? And God's seeing something in our lives that we need to grow, Renee.
Sometimes.
Yes.
I think that's what God.
Right.
Instead of
Yes.
ask for, I've already. Lord had already.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that, to me, it does create some limiting beliefs in my mind. Because when I have the solution and I'm praying for the solution, and when God doesn't bring the solution, then I have a new limiting belief that I've added to my list. It's a great point. Great point. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah, it's a great point. That's not my talent. That's not my area. So I don't even try and grow in that area. Very good point. Very good point. Ephesians Chapter 3. I love this passage. I think John has brought this out several times in some of his sermons. But Ephesians Chapter 3. Ephesians 3 and verse 20, it says, "Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us." I just love that. I love how it ties into this passage in James. God's power at work in our lives. All right. Is there any more comments as we kind of wrap up this section in James? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Right. Yeah, it's a great point. She was talking about how the Beatitudes are showing us how to mature. And then it goes on to talk about ask and seek and knock. Great point. Great point. So, okay, so Hebrews chapter 12, if you want to turn over there. Hebrews chapter 12. So if you think about where we've been in our classes so far, we start off just talking in Hebrews chapter 5 and 6 about the need to grow. We need to grow. It's something God is calling us to do, is to mature. And if we're not on that path to maturity, we're actually going the opposite direction. We got that concept. Sam then went on to talk about the idea of setting our minds, Philippians chapter 3. George preached a sermon on Colossians chapter 3. They went hand in hand. But setting our minds, because we have to have our mindset, like Stan was saying, we've got to have our mindset to grow, or we're going to be caught off guard when some of these trials happen. And trials help us grow. Then we went on to talk about some of the things that hinder us from just even getting started. And that is limiting beliefs, and our past are often things that hinder us, that give us weight, extra baggage, that we're trying to carry with us down the road. And when it comes time to grow, it's just like, I can't do much more because I've got so much weight on me already. And then we've talked about this tool of asking for wisdom. And then here in Hebrews chapter 12, you can see where we're going, as this is a familiar passage to us. But let's go ahead and start reading here in Hebrews chapter 12. It says, therefore, of course, we're coming out of Hebrews 11, the kind of the hall of fame of people of faith. But here in Hebrews chapter 12, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. As for discipline that you endure, God is treating you as sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which you have all participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but be rather healed. Strive for peace with everyone, and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. And no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, and he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. Okay, so we don't have just a whole lot of time So let's think about maybe two thoughts. At the very end of this passage, he talks about Esau. What was Esau's problem? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great thought. He's more concerned with his immediate needs than he was future. And I feel like that's exactly right. He had no vision for his future. He was just putting out fires. I'm hungry, I've got to eat or I'm going to die. Just a typical, I think, kind of young man. But you think about that. It relates to you and me. I mean, how many times do we get caught up in just our day-to-day activities? We're just putting out fires. And we have no vision for who we're supposed to be, where we're supposed to be growing to. We have no vision. And I look at that and I think that's very likely Esau's problem. But then if you go back to verse 1, I think it ties in so well with what we've been talking about, where it talks about laying aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. That's what we've been talking about, What is hindering our growth, right? Limiting beliefs in our past. And we've got to lay aside those weights. It's a lot easier to stand up here and say these things than it really is, do those things. But that's what he's writing. Yeah. Yes. Right. It's a great point. I appreciate all of y'all's comments this morning. Appreciate it all. Thank you.